teaching, the women tend to be a lot more self-depreciating. So they use a lot more language, like they apologize a lot. But the apologizing, there's nothing wrong with apologizing, but apologizing when it's not necessary often is a sign where someone does feel a lot of lack of confidence. And I do find that usually my female students tend to do that more than my male students, whether it's just the way that they were brought up or the way that, we are encouraged as girls or boys growing up in our education. So I do find it can be a gender thing, but unfortunately, it is also one of those professions that people believe what you do. If you tell them you're a great conductor, people believe you. And I've seen a lot of conductors who are not necessarily that skilled, but they have this aura of confidence and they get through. And I have very capable colleagues who doubt themselves and it's not as effective. So confidence is a very big part of what we do, but we have to find our own way of navigating it. And for me, it was never false confidence. I can never fake it. If I'm not feeling confident, I can't fake it. But what I can do is a lot of visualization and obviously preparing yourself the best you can, but a lot of positive self-talk and a lot of kind of self-compassion meditation and a self-kindness really does help.
Hey there, welcome to the Conductor's podcast. I'm your host, Chao Wen-ting, a conductor with over 20 years of experience working with professional symphony orchestras, opera houses, new music groups, and vocalists. I'm also founder of Girls Who Conduct and have mentored hundreds of conductors from across the globe. I created the Conductor's podcast to share all the behind-the-scenes secrets with you while I interview conductors, musicians, and business gurus from around the world. This is a space created for conductors, conducting students, musicians, and non-musicians who are curious and interested in learning more about the profession, craft, industry, and business. Shy away from the real talk? No way. Money, hardship, growth, and the roller coaster of a conducting career are all topics we discuss here. I will give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you take action on your big dream, move through the fear that's holding you back, and have a real impact. Now, pull up a seat, make sure you're cozy, and get ready to be challenged and encouraged while you learn. Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Conductor's Podcast. I'm your host, Chao Wen-ting. I'm so thrilled to welcome you back to this week's episode because this interview was so interesting and so inspiring, and I really wanted you to hear it. My guest today is conductor Tianyi Lu. We first met as conducting fellows with the Dallas Opera's Heart Institute for Women Conductors. She was one of the 6 fellows, including myself, and since the Dallas Opera program, her career has really taken off. She served as the Judah May Fellow with the LA Philharmonic the following year and also was the assistant conductor with the Melbourne Symphony in Australia. Currently, she is the conductor in residence with the Stavanger Symphony Orchestra in Norway and the female conductor in residence for the Welsh National Opera in UK, and also the principal conductor of the St. Wolans Sinfonia in UK. But with all these great credentials, this had little to do with our conversation today. Of course, those are the backgrounds of kind of where we got to our conversation. But when I reached out to her about being on a podcast, she gladly accepted the invitation and said that she wanted to talk about psychology, well-being, and mindfulness on the podium. When I was first given this title, I had a totally different imagination of what she wanted to talk about. But the conversation had really taken such a turn, and it became one of the best interviews that I have ever had for this podcast. And I will let our conversation speak for itself. So you won't be influenced by my bias, but just wanted to share this with you. And here we go.
Hey, welcome to the show, Tianyi. I'm so thrilled and so happy to see you after all the years. And thank you so much for coming to the Conductor's podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Before we get started, can you please give everybody a brief intro about your backgrounds and how you get to where you are right now?
Sure. So my name is Tianyi Lu, and I was born in Shanghai, grew up in New Zealand, very far away from Europe, but that is where I live now. I live in Den Haag, The Hague in the Netherlands. I've been on this conducting journey since I was 19 years old, and I'm now 32. And it has been very challenging, but also it has given me a lot of knowledge about myself. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today about our journeys.
So you say that you started the journey when you were 19. That is, I think back then it was a young age. Now a lot of young people are going to conducting when they're like 15, 13. We see all the young prodigies. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started? Were you an instrumentalist, a musician? Or I remember knowing that you have dance background as well.
Yes. So I started, like many Chinese immigrants, I started learning the piano when I was 5. And then I heard the sound of the orchestra and wanted to join the orchestra and played the flute at high school. So I learned the flute and joined a lot of youth orchestras, sang in all the choirs. And I got into conducting in my second year of university in Auckland, where I wrote a piece for my high school orchestra. I was studying composition at the time, wanting to be a film composer, and ended up writing a piece that was quite complicated. And the teacher then asked me to conduct it because I wrote it. I had no idea what I was doing, but I caught the bug and I realized the joy for me was bringing together a group of people and bringing out their potential. And that for me was the thrill of conducting, was empowering others. So from the very beginning, the reason why I found conducting to be so thrilling was that aspect of working with people and to bring out their best and to make them feel great about themselves and allowing them to create something greater than the sum of its parts. So from there, I studied in the University of Melbourne. I went to Australia and studied there with an 87-year-old gentleman, who was one of his last students, named John Hopkins. He taught me that conducting is about humility. And I learned a lot about leadership from him and started formulating my own theories about what it means to be a conductor, especially with so few female role models. And since then, a lot of my energy has been taken up with thinking about the psychological aspect, because I found that to be one of the most challenging things about our profession. And yet we're not taught how to navigate this very complex aspect of leadership on the podium, and ended up in Europe, in the UK, studied in many, many masterclasses, as many young conductors do. And all the time I was grappling with a lot of self-confidence problems and issues about feeling uncomfortable in certain situations and not knowing how to find my feet. And luckily I had a lot of good friends and mentors and colleagues. I also read a lot. And now I feel like I'm a little bit older, a little bit wiser. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how now I can give back to the next generation.
This is a wonderful story. And it's really amazes me that your first conducting experience was about empowering people, because I felt a lot of people focused on themselves when they thought of conducting. It's about them waving their arms or being a leader. But that's a really interesting thing. So how we talk about musicians a lot of times feeling powerless, and especially in orchestras, because they don't have a lot of choices about the repertoire, about the rehearsal time, about their interpretation, and about what they should sound, how they should sound. How do you feel that the conductors can come in with the leadership style or with the psychological, I don't even have a good words for it, to really empower those musicians and to bring their best out?
So this is a question I've been grappling with since I started more than 10 years ago. But I think especially during the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time listening to and reading and thinking about listening to especially a great podcast by Brené Brown called Dare to Lead. It's on Spotify. And Brené Brown, you may know, she's known as the vulnerability expert. And she set up this podcast to talk about leadership, and not perhaps traditional forms of leadership that we may associate with notions of power and authority, notions of bullying, trauma even. And I think in a world where power can be often corrupted and can be abused, in the classical music industry, that is no exception. And often we're not given role models, and we don't really know how can we lead in a way that will bring out the best. And for me, I am a strong believer. And in fact, I have tested many ways of leadership during my studies where I've been told, don't be too nice, don't smile too much. You are there to be respected, not liked. I've been told I'm too nice. And very interestingly, often by male role models who are, they were taught a certain way and they were trained a certain way. And what I observed is that fear in power can be temporarily effective. But first of all, it never sat comfortably for me. I never felt comfortable shouting at people or getting upset at them. I didn't feel comfortable in myself, and it didn't get good results. And what I observed as well, it may temporarily in other people, other conductors, mentors, or other conductors that I've seen working, it may yield temporary results. But the best results are when a human being is feeling loved, when they feel valued, when they feel heard, when they feel like they can bring their whole selves. And that includes vulnerability, that includes weakness, that includes mistakes. And I think our profession in general, from what I've observed, there is a huge amount of pressure on musicians, on everyone to be perfect or to work at a very, very high level with perhaps very little space for forgiveness, to make mistakes, and to be vulnerable. And when you have a situation where people don't feel psychologically safe, and I would use that word quite often, it's a concept where if you don't feel safe enough to express your whole self, and that includes aspects of your culture and identity and gender, where you feel if you showed something about yourself, other people will judge you. If you make a mistake in playing, you will be singled out, you will be shouted at, or you may lose a job, and then you cannot bring your best. I think of myself as a conductor, my primary purpose, and that has definitely formed during the pandemic in a very clear way. When I step onto the podium, number one, the reason why I'm there is not to make a great concert. That is just the result. I'm not there to treat people like machines, which often it can be like this, that the well-being of the people in the room is my number one priority. So as a leader, when I go into a room, I psychologically prepare myself to create a safe space. Now, there are practices I do that help me get to that place, which we can talk about later. But the primary purpose and the goal for me when I get invited to go to an orchestra is, can I create a space where the musicians feel safe as much as possible? And there are forces that are beyond my control that are affecting the room. For example, I'm highly aware of the limited time resources. Often you have very little time to get to know people, to rehearse. The program may be extremely challenging. There's a lot of notes to get through. Everyone might be stressed. It might be a recording project where you only get one shot at the take, or you get two shots at the take, and everyone's very tense and nervous. It may be that they're not paid enough, that the musicians are going on strike, or, they're just barely able to make ends meet and they're not happy in their jobs and they're feeling very jaded. They may have had terrible behavior from their management or the conductors that have come before me who have shouted at them, who have bullied them, and they're suffering from psychological trauma. There are billions and millions of factors that go into the way an orchestra would respond to you when you step onto the podium that is beyond your control. And yet, there's something amazing about that position when you have the position of the conductor, that you can somehow change the atmosphere and the culture of a room just by your presence. So trying to summarize, I mean, it's a huge subject, but this is something I'm really passionate about, is I learn and I've experimented and I've read a lot and sort of prepare myself. And it's amazing. I have seen incredible results with orchestras that have at first been very nervous or perhaps quite hostile towards me. And by the end of the week, they're completely transformed. And I have so much feedback from the musicians saying, this was one of the best weeks of the season. They thank me for my energy and how they felt during that week. And for me, that is the greatest compliment. And usually what tends to happen is the concert is amazing as well, because if people are feeling great about themselves, they bring their best. And then you can create something extraordinary in the concert hall. But for me, that's almost a second priority. It's almost a sort of natural result of my number one purpose. And I realized that this profession, people burn out very easily. And I was getting burnt out before the pandemic started. I was quite exhausted. And I realized that it wasn't enough for me just to go in every week in a different city, conduct a program, hello, goodbye. Yes, we make a great concert, but I just remembered going home after concerts feeling very empty. And I realized I'm not going to be able to do this long term. This is not enough to sustain what I need out of this profession. It's not enough for me just to conduct a great concert. So when I realized that I put the well-being of musicians first, and I see the results of that, then that gives me great energy to keep going in my work.
I really resonate to what you said earlier in your conversation, that we're being told that too nice or don't smile or we look weak when we just wanted to be ourselves, the podium. But I love this idea. And to be honest, this is my first time hearing people talking about the main goal, not having a great concert at the end of the week, because that's kind of, we were trained to have a great performance by the end of that week or by the end of the cycle or whatever. But can you share with us a few experiences, like a few stories or things that you do differently, or like more you on the podium, like that you do differently now or as opposed to before, so my audience can understand more concretely what exactly is being done now?
So a couple of things I've been doing during the pandemic was I got very depressed and I felt purposeless. I felt very lost. I couldn't study. I was very unmotivated. And I realized I had connected my ego too closely with the profession and my sense of worth with my work. So I had to extricate my sense of worth from my identity as a conductor. And I did a lot of loving kindness and self-compassion meditation. I downloaded an app called Insight Timer, which has a whole heap of free meditations. And in particular, this lady called Sarah Blondin, who just has this incredible calming voice. And she has this ability to make me feel really connected with myself and connected with love and all the values that I believe in. And I would always, in the morning, I would go have a shower, whatever, get ready, eat breakfast. And I would spend some quiet time meditating and just preparing my energy to surround myself in love. And it's very interesting. I almost think of it as like covering yourself with a beautiful blanket of love. And it's a really interesting concept because then when you step into the room, I started doing this not during the pandemic only, but I started thinking about preparing yourself energetically a few years back, actually, when I was doing a lot of debuts with orchestras. And I was finding that sometimes I was faced with a lack of respect. I was faced with orchestras that were quite hostile in the beginning or perhaps were not very respectful. And I felt this need to try and prove myself. I felt this, sometimes I have to shout, sometimes I feel very disempowered. And I found that in order to prepare myself psychologically and to build myself up in terms of my confidence, I had to do a lot of this kind of focusing on love, or I would read a poem that would really inspire me. I would listen to a song that would be, in touch with my values. And I found that to really help me go into the space feeling grounded. So I would do that kind of energy work. I've also spent a lot of time yoga and, physically moving. So walking in nature and connecting and being alone and just spending time working on my psychological issues, because you are exposed up there. And if you have any doubts about yourself, and, we're talking about the whole shebang of like childhood trauma and like, therapy and working on yourself and noticing when you're upset and being emotionally intelligent. All these things come into who you are on the podium. So I've been reading a lot. I've been working through a lot of my trauma from my past that has caused me to be afraid in certain social situations. And that has really helped me as well on the podium. I can give one particular example recently where one of the musicians in the orchestra were getting quite frustrated. We were doing Beethoven 7, and there was a bowing that he disagreed with. He was a section leader in the strings, but he felt like he couldn't speak up. And often what you find is the power of the conductor, the role is often so ingrained in a situation, is that the musicians get very frustrated because they feel like they can't make a difference. But they're very frustrated and they feel they disagree. And I try and create a space for disagreement. And I saw he was getting frustrated. And I said to him, look, I would love to have a conversation. It doesn't have to be my way. What do you think? And he said very loudly, no comment, in front of the whole orchestra, and this passive aggression. And so what I saw in that was he was afraid, and I knew that it was not to do with me. It was his own kind of journey. And I was able to be very calm to be able to see through that. And in the next rehearsal, I went up to him, just the two of us, and we had a conversation. And I actually said to him, I think about what you said yesterday, and I agree with you in this situation with this acoustic. It doesn't work for your section. So I've come up with a solution. What do you think? And he burst out, in all my years of working on this symphony, I've never seen such a stupid bowing. My student who plays in the Berlin Philharmonic, and he rattled off, he just let out all this emotion directed towards me. And in the past, I would have been quite like, oh shit, I'm so sorry. I would have felt terrible and really insecure. But I just listened calmly, and I was able to hold all the negative emotion that he was throwing at me. And I could recognize that this person just hasn't been heard. And I could imagine the number of conductors he's worked with over his career who never listened to him. And he was letting it all out. And afterwards I said, I completely agree. Let's try this new solution. And he said, okay, thank you for coming to talk to me. And then by the concert, I changed it. I very calmly spoke to the orchestra, and I said, I had a conversation with your leader. I always give credit to people so they feel empowered that I'm not the only one making decisions. I always credit people when they make suggestions. And then I say, let's try this. I apologize. It's different to my first idea, but after having heard what we did yesterday in the first rehearsal and consulted with one of the section leaders, this is what I would like to do. The orchestra were totally happy to change. And in the concert, of course, this particular person played the most enthusiastically, out of the whole orchestra. He even came in early once because he was just like looking at me the whole time. He was just like giving his all because he realized this was someone who was willing to listen to him, and he felt valued. And for me, that was a joy to see, and I just think it could have been a really scary and nasty situation. There's often conflict, but if we can navigate conflict with grace and we can bring out the best in people and to keep ourselves calm and happy, then I think it's a great skill, and it's not easy to do that, actually. So that's an example of the power of being grounded and being kind and being loving towards yourself and others.
So I have to admit, this was totally different from what I had expected, because I thought you were coming to say we should do this and that on the podium instead of this. Don't say this, say this. But I love what you said. It starts from yourself. You have to be confident enough and love yourself to deal with those kind of difficult situations, because I'm sure that this kind of things happen, especially when you're young and a little less experienced. So it sounds like the way you prepare yourself for premieres that means working for an ensemble for the very first time is just be totally prepared yourself mentally, instead of worrying about how they were going to treat you, how they would respond to you, if they would like you. Is that right, that I'm getting at?
Yeah, I would say that you are not just a conductor. That, Chaowin, you're a conductor. That's part of what you do, but that's not who you are. It's just one part of you. And when we are on the podium, we're not just there to wave our arms. We are a whole person. And if we work on our whole person, not just the technique, not just knowing the score very well, but be open, and be open with the energy of kindness and of calmness somehow, mindfulness. I think of it as mindfulness in the sense that, you can never prepare 100% for every situation. Every time you go into a room, you have no idea who the people will be, what they had for breakfast, their histories, everything I just mentioned earlier about, who knows what's been going on that has created their mood. The orchestra has a particular culture. In the country that you're working in, they have a particular culture. But what you can do is you can bring your best self. And what I often observe that when I was younger, and also a lot of my, especially female colleagues, but also for men, I think for everyone in this profession, it's difficult for us to do our best when we are bombarded with psychological fear. So, I remember when I was studying in college, and I would be in a masterclass situation where I didn't feel safe, where I felt like I was making a lot of mistakes, or the orchestra didn't like me, or I didn't feel confident, and I would be worse and worse and worse, and I normally can conduct great, but in front of the teacher, I just couldn't do it, or I'd be very tense and my shoulders would get really sore, or I would try and speak, but my tongue would get tied and I wouldn't make any sense because I was just worrying about, oh, terrible, my conducting is really bad. Oh no, I shouldn't have done that. Or maybe I shouldn't have worn the heels today. Or maybe the cello just really doesn't like me because I didn't, or I get asked a question from somebody and I was like, oh, I didn't think of that answer. I'm so dumb. And I start putting myself down, and you have this internal dialogue. And then on top of that, you're like, oh, I'm the only woman in the masterclass. I have to prove that I deserve to be there. Or I've got this audition and I have to win. Or I have to prove to the orchestra that I'm good enough so they'll invite me back. All these layers of self-talk and dialogue can really stop you from listening and from really being there in the moment. And that's all we can do. We can't be perfect. But what we can do is train ourselves so that we bring all the tools in the bag that we have and our best in that moment. And that's all we can do. We can't know more than we know in that moment. But I find for a lot of people, it's very difficult to bring their best selves if they're not feeling psychologically safe. And so everything I've talked about, reading about psychology, talking to colleagues about the psychological, the emotional aspects. If you've been through a really traumatic masterclass, don't just hold it in your heart. Talk to the other participants. And if nobody in the group understands or gets it, have a group of people around you. You can call them, have a support network where you can start making sense of these things. And then I just read a whole heap about social theory and feminism. And suddenly, oh my goodness, you put this in the context of huge, bigger issues that are way beyond you. And the more you understand, for me, the more it is easier for me to understand what's going on and be able to let it go.
I love what you said at the end, to let it go, because of course we have a lot of traumatic masterclass. Or sometimes it's not even masterclass. I know the old school, the previous generation conducting teachers were known, or they were also trained to be shouted at all the time, that you are embarrassed in front of the ensemble, that when you finally have a chance to get up and conduct, you feel so dumb because your teacher is stopping you after the first beat. It's like, what are you doing? I was not clear. They didn't get your tempo. What were you thinking? I was like, I wasn't thinking there was a problem.
But you see, that behavior, and I want to just have a note on that behavior. We accept that behavior as being normal, but actually that behavior is damaging. And I'm just going to call it out right here. And I'm not afraid to do that now. I can see when somebody is treated with disrespect, when somebody is laughed at, it's not good pedagogy, first of all. It doesn't help someone learn when you conduct one by and they're like, stop, that's terrible, blah, blah, blah. The latest research on human development and learning is that the human brain does not learn through punishment. It does not learn through negative feedback. We learn through being safe. First of all, we need to feel safe, because if you're terrified of being embarrassed, it's like a tiger about to eat you or a truck about to hit you in the face. You're not going to be able to learn anything in that moment. Okay. So in order for the human brain to learn, you have to feel safe. And you cannot feel safe if you feel like you're being attacked or you feel afraid. Now, I'm not advocating that conducting teachers should be nice to people and only say positive things. That is not what I mean. What I mean is that this old school way of shouting or, abuse or verbal abuse, or a way that is not very constructive, it's damaging. It's damaging. But unfortunately, because the most powerful people in this industry right now, and a lot of the teachers out there, that's the way that they teach. We assume it's the best way. But I can tell you right now that it's not effective. And luckily, the students that are psychologically strong or are managed to bounce back or manage to filter through all the difficult stuff and manage to actually learn something, those are the ones that manage to stay. But there are a lot of people who drop out of the profession. Or I know for myself, I nearly quit a few times because of this trauma that I experienced. And I also speak to a lot of my friends who are studying right now, the sort of next generation, or people that I mentor, who are considering quitting, not because they think they're bad conductors, but because they cannot deal with the psychological stress of being in this profession. And I think that is a great shame, because we need to train our next generation to, first of all, be strong. And how do they navigate situations like that? And second of all, how do we stop this vicious cycle from continuing? Because it's not healthy.
But as you said, the theory and the study of learning has changed so much in the past decade or so. Now we have new theories and new discoveries, a lot of them backed by neuroscientific evidence of how human beings learn better. As you said, that now we are advocating, or there are more people, as I was just reading about, a way of parenting, peaceful parenting. So they emphasize on connecting with your children instead of telling them what to do and set rules and expect them to just obey it. But you kind of find a mutual ground of understanding for people to understand concerns and all that. But coming back to our field, it's mostly in opera and orchestral conducting, or like that industry. Do you feel that it's sometimes the communication is very one-way? Like, we are on a podium, we tell people what to do, and they might tell us back what they think if they feel comfortable, or sometimes they approach you during a break. Like, I didn't really think this was working, or the strings were too loud. I'm like really playing my bassoon out of my lawn and I can be heard. I'm very concerned. Or as you said, a lot of times the ensembles might be hostile for whatever reason, that they don't like seeing another new conductor, or they're just tired, or they're stressed out. When those little things happen in rehearsal, or kind of outside of rehearsal during that week, when you're just going in and out, how do you deal with those things while preserving yourself, your own well-being and mindfulness, that so you don't get bitten sometimes?
Absolutely. So we first have to acknowledge, absolutely, what you said is right. It is often very one way. We have to remember the history of the conductor as a profession, as a role, has traditionally been associated with a dictatorial role where the maestro has all the vision, the classic carry-on with his eyes closed. If he has his eyes closed, how can he see any information? I mean, yes, he's listening, but it's it's all about him. It's all about the conductor's vision, and the musicians are there to fulfill the vision of the conductor. Now that idea of the conductor is still very strong. And we also have to remember we are standing in the front. We are on a podium. We have a stick. And we are given a voice. Like, it's our job and our responsibility to make a good concert. And that model is the way that things are done. But I can point out a lot of alternative models. So, for example, there are orchestras that don't use conductors, which have a perhaps more democratic process. We have to look at other professions where this is not the case, that you only have 1 week to try and put a show together. You might have a band that might rehearse over years and years, and they each have the potential to improve the sound of the group. So we have to acknowledge the history, and the role of the conductor is a very one-way communicative process. Is it the best way? Does it produce the best musical results? I'm not so sure. Now, this calls into question the whole way we are running the whole industry. And this is probably a huge conversation, because I have a vision for this industry that I believe that, no, I don't think it's the best way. Communication is dialogue. It's not one way. It has to be both ways. Same thing as parenting, traditional forms of parenting. The child obeys the parents. In Chinese, coming from a Chinese background, my grandma always told me, 听话, which means listen. But we never listen to the child, or at least that should not be as equal, right? Because parents know best. But now, if we look at the latest research, if you want your toddler to do what you want your toddler to do, shouting at your toddler, they won't listen unless you attune to them. Because human beings, we're relational beings, right? The same thing with an orchestra. So my ideal situation, maybe in 30 years' time or 10 years, 20 years, I don't know, is there's a lot more two-way dialogue, that musicians feel safe enough to express their ideas, that perhaps we run rehearsals very differently. And I have been attempting to do this in a small way within the parameters of what's possible in the way that I work. So, for example, I try immediately from the very first rehearsal, I give off this energy of openness. If anyone asks a question and they're like, oh, sorry to ask this question, I always say, please don't apologize, to give people permission to feel like they can disagree. And what I find is that from the first day, if it's an orchestra that's used to giving the conductor a lot of suggestions and feedback, they will do it. A lot of other orchestras in the first day, they might not do it. But by the second and third rehearsal, when they see that I'm open to it, they will come to me either during the break but often it's accompanied by a lot of fear. But what I'm trying to do with the orchestras I work with is I create an atmosphere where people feel safe to give suggestions, and I encourage it. I actively encourage disagreement with me or suggestions, and I praise them for it. So I would say, someone would say something during the break like, oh, I noticed the bowing here is a bit different to the cellos, or here, the sforzato, it's not written in the score, but the horns are doing, should we do it as well? I would say, da-da-da person, or your principal oboe or your principal double bass saw this. I think it's absolutely wonderful. Let's do that. And I acknowledge it. And the orchestra feels, oh, my colleagues are getting praised for speaking up. Then they may start using their own musicality, because the problem is, unfortunately, why do orchestra musicians have the lowest job satisfaction ratings, even worse than garbage collectors? They did a study in the UK, maybe 7 years ago, where job satisfaction rating over many, many, many different professions, orchestral musicians hated their jobs in general more than garbage collectors. And I can totally see the reason why. You're training from a very young age to practice this highly difficult instrument at a very high level. You have to be super intelligent, super ambitious, and then you spend the rest of your life being told what to do by a person less experienced, younger than you, maybe a worse musician than you. Of course, you're going to hate the conductor. Of course, you're going to hate your job, and you're very badly paid, and you're overworked, right? So I think of all these things when I'm approaching orchestras, and I try really hard to make it a two-way process. Of course, like I said to you earlier, it's not always possible because of the limited resources and the historical role and what orchestras expect. You also have to be aware that orchestras sometimes are not comfortable being asked what they think. And they start causing problems because they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe when you ask them, what do you think? They want somebody who is really strict. And I'm not just talking about dialogue, I'm talking about the way they play as well. There are certain orchestras, when I conduct them, I can feel in my fingers and my body that they need someone to control the sound. They need someone to tell them exactly how they want it. And then there are orchestras who I prefer working with, who are actually thrive. And the magic happens when I soften my hands, when I give them more space to listen to each other, when I don't dictate every single punctuation and articulation and exactly how it goes, that I give them a lot of room for rubato, that I give space for them to linger, or I hear what they want to do, and then I give them that space to do it. For me, that is the most beautiful way of making music, is this beautiful give and take. And it's not just in the way I speak to the orchestra, it's also in the way I conduct. And I always try and go in with this openness, but if I feel like the orchestra needs me to control because that's what they're used to, then I have to switch because they need more control. Unfortunately, I don't like the way of control because I don't like the sound that creates. I like the sound when musicians feel free and spontaneous. But that can only happen when they're feeling safe. It's a very long answer to your question, but it's a very complex issue.
Yeah, we understand that things are really complicated. And I also saw the survey or the study about job satisfaction rate. And at first I was stunned. I felt like people were doing what they love. They come in and play music and they want a prestigious audition of some kind. Because we know when you are out of school, winning a job is such a difficult thing, like winning your first job. And after you have a job, you should be happy kind of playing music all day. But there are a lot of circumstances around it. I know I've asked a lot of questions about how you actually work with the orchestra, but kind of coming back, I wanted to ask, you mentioned a few times that you don't have a female model to look up to in this new or newer leadership style. Do you feel that this leadership style is quite gendered, or did you feel that now you're a little more established, that we are perhaps either kind of establishing a different leadership that is maybe contrary, not just contrary, but very different from the old maestro style, and how we can influence our past generation, next generation? Sorry, I'm not sure what I'm asking.
I hear you, though. I think I get the gist of what you're trying to
say. Yeah.
Because it's a question I've asked myself, that whether this is a gender problem, whether it's because of the fact we've only had male conductors in the last few generations, that we've created this kind of culture, or is it actually inherent in a woman to be kinder, to be more emotionally aware? I think it's a bit of both. I don't think it's either or, and I don't think we should generalize, because of course we have very sensitive men and we have very strong women who subscribe to the male or traditional male notions of toxic masculinity and authoritative power, one-way forms of communication. So I would avoid trying to generalize. I would say that there are different models of leadership. And right now, with the new evidence in the neurological science and the social science, we are realizing more and more through scientific study and also through life experience and the way that our world is becoming more and more aware of issues like Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement. You know, people are a lot more aware now and talking about these issues of marginalized groups of people in our society. We're talking about dominant cultures. You know, we're having these very complex, nuanced conversations that we weren't having even 20 years ago. So it's a very exciting time. So I would say maybe it can be a gender thing, but it doesn't mean all female conductors are going to be, compassionate. It's a skill. It's a skill that can be learned. But I have observed that in general, the way that we bring up men, the way that we bring up boys, and the way that we bring up girls, there are huge forces, historical forces, social forces, the way that we encourage boys from a very young age, give them a lot of confidence. For girls, we always question, we get them to say, be humble, don't speak too loud. All these things play into the way a child will develop. we have to be aware of these things, but we also have to remember not to put ourselves into boxes and to remember that these are skills. I think a lot of people say, I don't have the personality to be a conductor, or I'm just not strong enough. And that's what I believed. When I was young, I only saw male role models and I thought, oh my God, this guy is so badass. He's just so strong, and not only physically strong, he's got actually these huge biceps, which I will never have, but he's also really bossy. And I don't feel like that's my personality. I just can't do that. That's not me. That does that mean I can't be a conductor? And it's what I found is that it's very useful to see examples of different forms of leadership and to start going, oh, actually, you know what? I don't have to be like that. Someone tells me, you smile too much. I now say, thank you for your feedback. That's their story. This is not my story. And to find your inner compass. And it takes a long time. It took me many years, and I'm still formulating who I am. But I do feel very much happier where I am now after years of experimentation of what works for me and what works for someone else. It doesn't mean it's good for me. And what I believe in and what gives me joy. Because ultimately, we do what we do because we hopefully because it gives us something, it fulfills something in us. And if we're aware of that and we can find our compass, then, for me, my compass is very simple. I choose love. I don't choose fear. And I often find in a situation where I have to make a choice, is this decision out of fear or is this decision out of love? Will I say this word? Will I behave in this way because I'm afraid? Or will I behave in a way that will be loving? And it's not always possible to make the choice to be loving because you are shitting your pants and you are frightened and you might not physically be able to act out of love in that moment. But I do believe the more that we choose out of love, the more empowered and the more of ourselves we can bring. And that's my real dream, actually. That's why I'm a conductor. And also, to be honest with you, the more I develop in this profession, the more I realize, man, there's so much more I want to do in this life than conducting. Conducting is just a way in which I can shine my light or to express myself, but there's so much more potential in every human being. So I'm really excited about that.
It sounds like that you have put in a lot of thoughts about your career and who you are doing, I felt pandemic has been a point for a lot of people, kind of making them to do different things and explore different things because we were forced to in our life. So how do you see yourself kind of moving forward in the conducting and also in your journey of seeking psychological mindfulness for the industry, for the musicians? I think it's such an important thing for more colleagues to learn about.
So at the moment, I'm pregnant, actually. So this is the next stage of my life. I'm really happy and excited to, I guess, experience something that I've never experienced before, motherhood. And I would be fascinated about what I will learn on this journey. And I do feel like it will hugely impact the way I work and am as a human being. I can see a lot of all the issues that I've spoken about during our podcast. I have this secret dream. It's not a secret, actually. I'm very vocal about, wanting to shift the industry and wanting to make it more compassionate. But I'm realizing that it doesn't have to start on the podium. It starts as soon as we walk out the door, when we pick up the phone to make a COVID test appointment, the way that we go shopping and speak to the supermarket lady. It's who we are. It's not just something we do on the podium. And to redefine what it means to be a human being. And for me, that's the most exciting part. There are a lot of things that I'm working on in myself, that I'm discovering flaws, this kind of tendency to want to control and have to let go. I'm sure having a kid would help me with that. But I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to learn. And I'm thinking about there's a great lack of this awareness of psychological safety and all these things, and whether I could develop something to help people. And eventually, who knows, it may go beyond the music industry itself. But that's where I'm thinking about at the moment. And I have no idea what the universe has in store for me, but I do feel a calling to do much more than concerts. For me, it's about the community. It's about really making a difference and empowering people. So in terms of where I'll be in a few years, I'm not sure. Probably, carting a little baby around. But also what I'm really wanting to do is to find my own voice. And when I'm saying find my own voice, I mean there are so many pressures from the industry, from agents, from, I'm very lucky I'm with an agent who really listens and really supports my decisions. But I see so many things in our industry that is pushing and pulling people in all these different directions. And in general, our very capitalist society, there's so much pressure for people to perform and to be, social media, there's constant pressure for us to be good and to be successful or to be seen to be successful. There's a lot of things that are separating us from our own humanity, I think. And there's not much space for silence, and there's not much space for negativity, for negative emotions, for vulnerability, for sadness, for mourning. And I think we need to heal ourselves. At the moment with the war in Ukraine, I cried for the whole morning that morning. And I did a concert that evening with an orchestra. And I just said to the orchestra that morning, I said, I just want to acknowledge that I'm feeling really sad right now. And it feels in some ways pointless. Why are we conducting this concert? It just seems so, in the perspective of what's happening, why are we doing this? And I think as a conductor, part of our job is to lead in situations of darkness and great pain and to find the source of light and hope. And I said, we have to remember what's important is love, and to choose to keep going, to choose courage, to choose to be kind, and to keep making art, to keep bringing more compassion into this world and tell the stories and to listen. And I believe the power of music can do that. And I believe the power of listening can do that. And it's not just music itself, it's the act of listening, the act of attunement, the act of communication. And so if we can somehow bring that into our world, into our music industry, but into the greater world, then I believe that is what my purpose is in this life. So that's a very abstract concept, but it is what's guiding me. And I hope that the universe will, show me the next steps to go, because I feel like that's more important than the actual practical stuff. The practical stuff will happen, but you need to build that inner confidence and the inner compass.
I love your closing statement. It felt a little formal, but welcome to motherhood. It will be such an adventure and a lot of things that you didn't expect to learn.
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
But I'm so excited. And thank you so much for coming to the podcast. And I know you're just kind of preparing yourself for this new page in your life, being a mother. But please, can you tell my listeners where they can find you if they want to reach out? I know anywhere that you're comfortable,
Sure. I mean, I have a website. It's very easy to find me. Just search for my name and my website will show up, and there's a contact page and it will go directly to my email inbox. And I'm always very happy to talk to people. I had many people who helped me and gave me time when I was studying and on my journey. So I'm very open to people who want to have a chat if I have the time. Well, now I have lots of time because not born yet, but we'll see what happens after the birth.
Well, enjoy the time before the baby arrives.
Thanks.
You'll miss it.
Thanks.
But thank you so much again.
Thank you, Chowan. Good to see you again.
Here you have it, my friends, and I hope you got something out of our conversation. What Tianyi said had really struck me at so many different levels. And the most amazing and important thing I felt that I took from this conversation was when she said that she changed the goal of each concert cycle or each week of guest conducting, from preparing a great concert into just giving everybody a great experience, which was something that honestly never occurred to me until this point. Because as many musicians, I was always trained to, of course, to prepare for the best concert we can. Not asking for perfection, but always kind of in the pursuit of perfectionism, being the best we can or give the best of who we are. While a lot of time, of course, we sacrifice on the mental side, which is also important, of if not more important than giving a great performance. And I recently took an audition for conductor position, and I went in with this new mindset. Because with audition, I always felt it was a little bit faking, you see. I was asked to go into a 2-hour rehearsal to run a piece that they had just performed to show what I can do differently from their previous conductor or the previous candidate. And then to read a new piece that the orchestra will be just singing for the first time to show that I can take them through a new piece. And I always felt this is a little artificial, and like for the piece that they have already known, I'm there for no purpose, right? The old me would feel that, oh, there is no concert and I'm just there to show myself, to change things for the sake of changing things. But really, Tianyi's sharing put me in a different perspective. I'm going to share my idea about this music, about this composer with the musicians and take them through it and have them experience a maybe different version of the music that they had never experienced or they had never thought of. And that would be my purpose. And I had a great time, I have to tell you. And this mindset also separated me apart from the reality. Okay, I'm here for a job. I'm here auditioning for something that I want to win the position. I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was just really focused on, all right, are the musicians with me? Are they kind of giving me signs of that they might be troubling or they might be struggling a little bit with the music? Is the piece that they're reading a little above their level? How can I be more helpful to that particular player, for example? Can I be more clear with my beat? Or should I just let them be alone and not to single them out because they were already nervous and embarrassed, perhaps enough? So I also started trying out meditation, and this is on the day of recording this, it's day 18, and I'm not sure if it's changed anything, but at least when I'm feeling really nervous or like kind of going crazy when I don't have enough time. I always go really crazy when I'm very rushed, but then I just breathe, and it's had really helped. So I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. And if you have tried anything that Tianyi suggested, proposed, and if you've seen any results, please share with us. We love to hear from you. And I will see you again at the same time, same place. Bye for now. Take care. Here you go, my friend. I hope that our conversation inspired you if you're a conducting student or a young conductor still working up the ladder. And if you're an experienced conductor, that you found some common ground in our experiences, or that you share and agree with our visions in helping the current and the next generations of conductors of color, minority conductors, or women conductors. I can only speak for myself, but I certainly don't want to be the first or the only woman in my field anymore. I know we still have a long way to go before women can perhaps one day become the majority of the dominating gender in this field, but I'm really glad that we are working toward at least some gender parity on the podium. And it's really comforting to know that there are a lot of colleagues, both men and women, white and people of color, working towards this mission. If you haven't already, I would really encourage you to check out the website of Girls Who Conduct and a lot of great organizations working towards more diversity, inclusion, and equity in the field. including the one that Julia is involved with, the Women Band Directors International. Again, I'll put everything in the show notes, and you can find things at chaowenting.com/31. And I will see you next week at the same time, same place. If you're loving this show, please don't forget to subscribe and or leave a review on Apple Podcast. And that will be the best encouragement for me. Thank you and bye for now.